Welcome to Minds Worth Meeting. I'm Whitney Jennings.
And I'm Justin Lewis.
On this episode, Justin speaks with Dartmouth Tuck School of Business Clinical Professor of Strategy, Scott D. Anthony. His new book, Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World, was released in September 2025 and is making its way around the C-suite.
Scott is an award-winning, globally renowned expert on navigating disruption who is managing director of Innosight, the growth strategy consultancy founded by renowned Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen.
He's been recognized as one of the top management thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50 7 times and was winner of their 2017 Innovation Award. Justin, take it away.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining us on Minds Worth Meeting.
Justin, it is my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
So I see right behind you your new book, Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. One of the things that I think is so interesting about it is obviously you're talking about new things like AI, but you also go way back. We're talking like the invention of gunpowder. How do those things kind of come together?
Well, a couple things I'd say. First, the connective tissue, of course, between everything is an example of an epic disruption. That is the book title, after all. So these are 11 things that shaped the modern world. Why these 11? Well, the idea of disruptive innovation was first formulated by my mentor, former teacher, friend, colleague, Clayton Christensen. And in his book, The Innovator's Solution, he had a compendium of all the disruptive innovations that he and his co-author, Michael Rayner, could identify. I started there. I looked at ones that I thought would tell interesting stories, found a couple other ones to augment it, ran it through a blender, and ultimately we came up with 11. And there we go.
Okay, so thinking back, the way we look back at something like gunpowder or the printing press, that's another great example that you give. The way we look at those now about how paradigm shifting they are, how do you think people are going to look back at something like AI in, I don't want to say another 1,000 years, but many years down the road?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Sir Francis Bacon in 1620 in his magnum opus Novum Organum said in human history, there have been three technologies where you can draw a line before and after. So the world is different before and after that technology. He said the printing press, gunpowder, both of which are in the book, and the compass, which is not in the book. Those three technologies span across about 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. Today, I can get to four technologies that are transforming the world without leaving the letter A. Artificial intelligence, you mentioned. You can add in autonomous vehicles. You can add in augmented reality. You can add in additive manufacturing. You can even put in alternative proteins if you want to get to 5 with the letter A. So first, the point is the pace of change is increasing. We're dealing with more disruption than we have ever dealt with before. Our world is changing faster than it ever has before. And I think it is quite clear that artificial intelligence will be one of those where we say, remember when before, and look how different it is after. I spent 20 years as a management consultant, then transitioned a few years ago to be a teacher. Those are two industries, consulting and higher education, that are being radically reshaped in real time due to generative artificial intelligence. And that's just the beginning.
Yeah, people who listen to this podcast are going to be sick of hearing me say this, but I say it so often. I've got 3 nieces about to turn 10. I grew up in the 80s, right? So I grew up when the internet was coming online. We had the really slow modems, and now you and I can talk like this. So I think about when my 3 nieces are my age, what are they going to look back and say, when I was a kid, we couldn't imagine XYZ? Although it might be a hard question to answer, because if we can't imagine it, how do we know?
It's a great thought experiment. And, I've been doing this recently when people say, okay, can you give me just a quick explanation of what exactly this idea of disruptive innovation is? This idea that each generation we see something different. And the example I use is from computing. So my father was born in 1947. The year he was born, there was one computer in the world. It took up an entire room. It weighed about 20 tons. When I was born in 1975, there were tens of thousands of computers in the world, still mostly in isolated locations inside large organizations. When my daughter Holly was born in 2007, you now have hundreds of millions of computers in the world. And of course, that year was the year Apple introduced its first iPhone. So when my fourth child, my son Teddy, was born in 2016, We're now up to billions of devices in the world. This is disruptive innovation, taking things that were complicated and expensive, making them simple and affordable, changing industry dynamics, driving explosive growth. And your question about the 10-year-olds of today is really prescient. You look now around the world, and we take for granted where we are, that we have access to education, healthcare, and related areas. You go to many parts of the world until there was generative artificial intelligence, many people lacked access. Now, everybody's on the same footing. They've got baseline education in their pocket or at a place really nearby. That's going to change so many things that we can't anticipate.
Yeah, and I love that example, the sense that we see changes here, but changes in other parts of the world are so much more impactful right now in the sense that it is giving people access that they might not have had before. It's cool that I can use a vending machine to get ramen now, but we have those places, elsewhere in the world that didn't have access to education and healthcare, and that's it's amazing that those giant shifts are happening during our lifetime.
And I think really exciting too is, you look at what is the essence of disruptive innovation. It is a powerful democratizing force that allows more people to enjoy things that used to be confined to people who had well specialized skills, lived in centralized locations, and so on, which means we're going to see some massive growth in the years ahead. Now, I think an important thing to remember, for as much as I love disruption, and I truly do, for as much as I believe disruption is good, and I truly do, there's a downside, there's a dark side, there's a shadow to it. There are winners, there are losers. Change is incredibly difficult. So, for as exciting as all these changes will be, there will be challenges for sure. And I think we're experiencing that right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people hear the word disruption, they think of something bad in the sense that it's disrupting the way we live. It's become a bit of a buzzword in the sense that people throw it around now. This is disrupting this is disrupting that. So how should two separate but related groups, how should leaders and consumers be thinking about that word disruption?
So I think leaders should be really excited about it for the most part, because again, the research shows very clearly disruption is what drives transformative growth. So when you grab hold of disruptive change, it's what powers you to the next wave of growth for your organization. It's what allow you to reach people you historically couldn't reach, to get into markets you couldn't serve, and so on. When you can take things that were complicated and expensive and make them simple and affordable, it unlocks growth that was impossible before. Now, of course, there are risks associated with this. If you miss it, it can be really bad for you. But because we now understand the forces of disruption, everybody should be able to take advantage of it. From a consumer point of view, I think the thing you have to recognize is, just like the thought experiment you did with your nieces, the world is going to continue to change. What we need to do as individuals, whether we are the consumer or we're the parent or the uncle or whatever, is we have to be individually comfortable with a constantly changing world. And what I generally advise people to do is have fun with it. Go and play around with new technologies. One of the great benefits I have of the four children is they have no fear picking up technologies, so I can go do it alongside of them and learn from my oldest son what's going on with crypto, from my daughter what's going on with the changing face of media, from my 14-year-old what mixed reality really looks like on Roblox and Minecraft, and from my 8-year-old how consumption patterns for media are fundamentally transforming. He has never watched a linear television show. I'm sure your nieces have similar experiences. It's all watching creators, influencers, and other sorts of strange characters on YouTube that my wife and I are puzzled by, but that's the way the world works. That's the way the world works. So the key in all of this is, remember that as an adult, be a kid, learn, have fun, play.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I was in the broadcasting industry for many years, so I've been a heavy media consumer, and I just cut the cable. I canceled my cable and I'm just streaming now, and I thought it was going to be painful because you get so used to that. And it hasn't. It's thinking about it in a new way that, when you and I were growing up, you had to be home at 11 o'clock so you could see whatever the show is, and then you could record it. I worked at a video store when I was in high school. I've got boxes full of VHS tapes that are useless now.
Well, yeah, I think the thing you point out here, Justin, is we often think about what we're going to lose when we do something new. And this is why change is harder for us as adults than it is for kids because they don't have to unlearn. They don't have to worry about the loss. They just pick up whatever it is that helps them do what they're trying to do. We have to get over the loss that we feel and recognize and reframe and say, there's potential, there's fun, there's new growth in this. I remember a few months ago, I was in San Francisco and I was having dinner with someone, and he said, "Have you been in a robo taxi yet?" And I said, "No, I'm perfectly happy going in my Lyft." He said, "No, no, no. Remember the field that you were in. You have to keep trying new things." And there were pluses and minuses to my Waymo experience. And in my brain, I'm comparing against the taxi and all that. But then I remind myself that that which is imperfect today always gets better. The technology improves over time, it doesn't degrade. It will be something that I can be very confident my kids will do more, not less of in the years ahead. And I got a chance to experience it and live it. So, the point of all of this is we have to recognize we all have the status quo bias. We like things to stay exactly the way they are, but that gets us stuck. And stuck today is moving backwards. So, we got to overcome it.
Right. Is there anything in particular you can think of that really sticks in your mind that when you first saw it or first experienced it, you were like, wow, this is mind blowing?
Well, interesting question. So I was thinking about my first use of ChatGPT,
Hmm.
which, like many people, say there was a kind of plus minus to it. So at first, I'm totally dazzled by poems, Dr. Seuss, and all that, and then like, okay, let's get down to real work. This is the end of 2022. I had just started teaching. So I'm like, great, I will use this to create a syllabus for a class that I'm thinking about. The technology wasn't quite there. My prompting skills weren't particularly good. And what came out was honestly pretty mediocre. And I remember the feeling I had. It was elation. There's still room for me. There's still a role for me. I'm done with this AI thing. And then again, I reminded myself of the field that I'm in. And I reminded myself of what Ethan Mollick from the
Hmm.
University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business says, which is the price of admission for AI is three sleepless nights where you just muck around with the technology. So we started playing. We did songs to try and convince people in the family that we should get a fish. I did bedtime stories for one of my kids. I started doing small things in class rather than big things in class and began to realize the truly transformational potential of the technology. So, the lesson in this is you have to recognize that things are often imperfect in the beginning. You only learn how they really work by messing around with them. And that which is not that great today will be better tomorrow. We're into fifth generation technologies 3 years later, still imperfect in lots of ways, but incredibly powerful in many more as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly tomorrow is coming these days because we've seen ChatGPT advance, like you said, since 2022. And again, going back to my youth, we had the 8-bit Nintendo, and then a couple years later, Super Nintendo, and then a couple years later. So it took a good deal of time just to get to the next iteration, but now it feels like it's happening every other month.
No, I think that's exactly right. And again, for us as humans, it's a real challenge because in the old world where the platforms are upgrading every X number of years and sometimes decades, you had time to master, time to get used to, etc.
Right,
Now
right.
it is constant evolution. I guess the upside of that is if you embrace it in the right way, you never get so stuck in an individual way of doing something that you can't get out of it. You're just constantly learning, iterating, and changing. I think the other thing I would say, it's just important to remember it feels like things happen in lightning fast fashion, but often when we see that, it's because someone or many people have done decades of really hard work.
Right.
The
Yeah.
first mention of AI was a 1956 conference that was held at Dartmouth College. 2022 was year one of ChatGPT, but it's year 66 of artificial intelligence. So you see this part of the curve, you forget there's a long, flat thing that goes before it.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point that AI is not a new concept. Generative AI is relatively new, and then agentic AI and beyond and beyond. So when we're talking about AI, we're not just talking about ChatGPT, which I think has been so trendy that is what we think of. But again, it's not just generative; it's agentic, and what comes beyond that.
Absolutely. And I think then the thing that we also have to think about if we are business leaders is recognizing that we are introducing a technology into a complex system, which is our organizations and the ecosystems in which they sit. And that means things don't happen like that. And it means we have to think more about the human side of change than we have to think about the technological side of change. I did a panel last year at MIT, and one person on the panel, James Wilson from Accenture, said their research shows for every dollar spent on technology, companies should expect to spend $7 on the human side of change. And
Okay.
that's just a really important reminder. Often we go really quickly to use the technology without thinking about all the humans that need to change as well. And then we end up getting a bit stuck.
And I also feel when things are as trendy as something like generative AI is, many leaders can fall into the trap of we need to do AI without really knowing what that means, without thinking about the use cases. And one of the great quotes I really liked, you say, when disruption strikes, the right choices can often look like the wrong ones. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, I think you've begun to hit on it with the AI thing. So there's two challenges that you face. At the end of the day, the driver of the innovator's dilemma, Clayton Christensen's first book, the subtitle, When New Technologies Cause, wait for it, great firms to fail, great firms, not poorly run, stupid firms, great firms to fail. The real challenge of the innovator's dilemma is the resource allocation process. Left unchecked, you naturally will allocate dollars, units of time, manufacturing capacity, all that good stuff to making today better versus making tomorrow different. So the right choice when disruption is coming is to say, hold on a second. Let's not go and put a dollar into today better. Let's go and put a dollar into tomorrow different. But that doesn't look like the right choice because disruption arrives imperfect. A disruptive innovation is trading off pure performance to make things simpler, more convenient, more accessible. At first, you look at it and you say, this isn't that good. My core customer doesn't want it. So it seems to make sense to not allocate resources towards it. But in the long run, if you miss it, you're in a lot of trouble. Or you have the category problem that you describe, where it's like you get it and you catch disruptive fever and you say, let's go and throw everything into this without really thinking about what exactly you're doing. You feel like you're doing the right thing by allocating resources towards it, but you're doing the wrong thing because you haven't thought about how, why, where, and so on. So, in the fog of disruptive change, it's really hard as a leader. This is why you need almost the x ray vision that a good theory, model, framework provides, because it can cut through all of that and say, okay, when I see something like this emerging, trading off performance, starting at the fringe of the market, that tells me I ought to pay real attention. When it gets onto my radar screen and I'm ready to go and invest, I need to then step back and say, how do I think about this really strategically and use the right tools to do that? The tools are all there. But as humans, we default to doing the simple thing. And the simple thing, as discussed, is often the wrong thing.
And when it comes to the human aspect of it, I've heard a lot of people say it's not going to be that it's taking jobs away from people, it is augmenting what people can do with their jobs. And it's going to be the people who understand AI, not afraid of it, who are going to be the ones that are able to make that transition.
Certainly a perspective that a lot of people put forward. And I think the big question will be, is that right or not? And historically, that has been the case. Historically, new technologies have tended not to rip and replace, but augment and so on. Although there aren't very many buggy whip manufacturers or people who are selling ice blocks or telephone operators that are connecting circuits, et cetera. So there certainly are some tasks, some professions that technology has obviated. But I think certainly there is credence to the point of view that says we have something that can act as a springboard, that can act as a supercharger, that can allow us as humans to go further, go faster, go further, or go farther if we learn how to think and use it in the right sort of way. And certainly, whenever I'm doing a session with executives, I'll give them a list of emerging technologies and say, how many of you have played around with this technology? It's close to 99% around AI now, which is good. Everybody is and should be playing around with it because, as we talked about before, it is this generation's transformative technology. And the only way you learn is by playing with it.
Do you have some favorite examples of other disruptive technologies, epic disruptions besides AI? What are some of your personal favorites?
Well, I think autonomous vehicles, and of course, all things are related because the rise of AI makes autonomy more feasible. So those things link together. But autonomous vehicles, if we look at one that is in process, is one that I think is really interesting because the automobile is so central to today's world that when cars go fully autonomous, and who knows when that will be, it might be years, decades, centuries, who knows, but when that happens, the knock on effects are just tremendous. You can think about everything from media, because if you don't need to have hands on wheel, you're surrounded by screens. And those screens can be used for movies, advertising, and so on, to how cities are laid out and how you think about parking lots, to even somewhat morbid topics like organ donations. Many
Mm.
organ donations now are from otherwise healthy people that sadly die in automobile accidents. If that goes down, what do you do? Well, thankfully, we've got the rise of additive manufacturing applied to organs, so we can bioprint organs, so that can help balance it. But that idea that this one thing, autonomous vehicles, goes and spreads to lots of other things, I find just super interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Can you talk about additive manufacturing a little bit? You've said that a couple times. What's all involved there?
So, most people would know it as 3D printing. So, the idea is subtractive manufacturing is you're removing stuff. So, you're cutting parts away, you're milling, you're refining, and so on. Additive manufacturing, you're building up, often using plastics or derivative materials. The technology is now about 40 years old. It's from the 1980s where it first began to take root, and it's still very niche. It's used
Hmm.
for customized replacement parts, or my 14-year-old has a 3D printer in his room that he likes to screw around with every now and again. Classic disruption. It's not ready for the mainstream, so it's used at the fringes. As the technology continues to get better, you have the ability to really rethink how you go and make stuff, how you distribute stuff, how you support stuff. It's not hard to imagine a world where the home improvement market is radically reshaped by additive manufacturing, where the entire retail space is changed, especially once you add drone based delivery into the mix as well. The thing that's hard with all of these things is you see the faint signals now. It's not in the mainstream yet. You know it will be someday, but the exact tipping point, nobody can predict that. So the thing you got to do if you're a leader is have all of these things on your radar screen and just be watching. Where are the signs that suggest, hey, something that I thought was a rate limiter has been overcome? A big assumption that was holding it back, well, somebody has proven that wrong. And when you see those things, that's when it's really time to push on. I was going to say the gas pedal, but that doesn't work so well anymore. Push on the accelerator and have the vehicle go faster, or just will the car to go faster, whatever works.
Yeah, and thinking about the 3D printing, it's neat to be able to print a custom action figure, but it's also amazing to think about being able to print a custom prosthetic or something that can really change people's lives.
Or the thing, so you've got medical applications, or we moved to our place in the Boston area a few years ago after spending 12 years in Singapore. And, the house needed some work in some places, and there's a whole bunch of people that can help with that, who all are going to stores that are getting things that are produced in centralized facilities that are using a lot of things that are quite bad for the environment, and then shipping, blah 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 blah. You say, well, what if? What if you were able to do those things on site and we were able to get exactly what we wanted and something that nobody else in the world had? That's a pretty cool thing. So, everything from you can get a prosthetic that is precisely fit for you, so you can have your house, your bathroom, your whatever very quickly and very affordably looking exactly the way you want it in a way that's a lot better for the environment. That's again, the exciting power of disruptive change.
And what if a piece from my 12-year-old washing machine breaks and they don't make it anymore? So,
Exactly right. And now somebody does, and you then
right.
think too about what are the new models that emerge when that happens. One of the things that's very persistent when you study the history of disruptive innovation, what ultimately powers disruptive success, its secret sauce, is not technology, it's a business model, how you create, capture, and deliver value. The reason why McDonald's broke through is because it really nailed the business model. It simplified production in 1948 through the speedy service system. That's how it created value in a unique way. When Ray Kroc in 1954 became, in essence, the master franchisor, he approached franchises in a very different way. The idea of mutuality, where everyone wins together, that was a new way to deliver value. When Henry Sonnenborn, the CFO, said, we need to figure out how to make money, and we can do it through real estate, not hamburgers. That was the unlock that powered massive growth. That was how they captured value. You get those pieces together, it's the flywheel for your organization. So, back to additive manufacturing, there will be new disruptive business models related to reference design, support, and so on that will power some really interesting growth.
Yeah, and I want to talk about creativity a little bit. This is coming back to your book, Eat, Sleep, Innovate. The subtitle is How to Make Creativity an Everyday Habit Inside Your Organization. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course. So my second favorite book to talk about right now, right? And you can see it's on the stack here underneath Epic Disruptions. So the basic point in that book is to say, why is it that organizations struggle with being creative and being innovative? They're filled with human beings that at their core, human beings are innately creative. We're innately curious, we're innately experimental, but we go inside organizations and that seems to really be dulled, blunted, and so on. And the basic argument in the book is there is a hidden barrier to innovation inside organizations. It is inertia. It is the pull of the day to day. It are the habits that you follow in the organization that are all about continuing to execute, continuing to do what you're currently doing, maybe making today a little bit better, but again, not making tomorrow different. So the idea then in the book is to say, okay, if we want to fight inertia, it means we have to break old habits and create new ones. So we have to borrow from the habit change literature and bring it into organizations and adopt new routines and rituals that keep us fresh, that enable us to keep being curious, that enable us to keep experimenting. Not hard stuff, but stuff that you do have to be very careful and thoughtful in implementing because naturally you'll keep doing what you've always done. That's what we do as humans. You got to find ways to break that cycle. And that's the idea of the book.
Yeah, is there anything in particular when you're giving a presentation to a group of leaders or a group of on the ground employees? Is there anything that you can see that kind of moment of realization when you present whatever X might be that people kind of get it?
Well, when it relates to Eat, Sleep, Innovate, the kind of red thread in that book is a bank in Singapore called DBS Bank. I lived in Singapore from 2010 to 2022. When I moved there, it was the lowest ranked bank in Singapore in terms of customer satisfaction. When I left in 2022, it was not only the best ranked bank in Singapore, it was regarded as the best bank in the entire world, the most innovative, the most digital, the organization that really had got it right. And the story is really about creating new habits inside the organization. DBS pioneered a tool that we ultimately branded it. It didn't call it this, but we put the brand on it. And when I say we, the book had two co-authors, two former colleagues from my old consulting company, Innosight, and Paul Cobbin, who was the chief data and transformation officer at DBS during the transformation. We branded it a BEAN, behavior, enabler, artifact, and nudge. A behavior enabler, in essence, is a ritual. An artifact and nudge, in essence, reinforces that ritual. When I talk about the examples at DBS, different ones resonate with different groups, but one that people really like is something called meeting mojo. Everybody has experienced bad meetings that start late and end later, one dominant voice, and so on. DBS had that too. So they came up with this idea. Every meeting has a mo, a meeting owner. They need to make sure that the meeting starts on time, ends on time, clear decisions are reached, everybody participates. They also appoint a Joe, a joyful observer. The Joe is watching. Are people present? If not, hold on a second, put your phones down, turn your cameras on, let's return to the meeting. At the end of the meeting, they give visible public feedback to the Mo. How well did they do their job? After the meeting ends, everyone takes out their phone and says, all right, let's rate the Mo and Joe. They get a leaderboard that shows how well they did compared to their colleagues. It's a very simple ritual, but it's incredibly effective. Before the ritual, 40% of people at DBS, 40, said meetings encourage collaboration, which is a key input to creativity and agility. After meeting Mojo, 90% of people said meetings encourage collaboration. So, this idea that if we can just inject the right reinforced rituals, we can have the right beans to encourage whatever behavior we're trying to encourage, that really sticks with people. Because, in the words of Paul Cobbin, the co author, it shrinks the challenge. Yes, of
Mhm.
course. There's a lot you have to do to transform an organization. It's not just about beans, but it's a thing that anybody can pick up and do. You don't have to be a CEO to do it. You can do it at any level of an organization, and you can make real progress using it.
Yeah, and I think there's such a bonding aspect to that as well within the team, is wanting to please your teammates and that being mutual. And again, I think knowing that you'll get that feedback and being positive about it, I think is a good way to bond those teams together as well.
Absolutely. So it's one of these great ones that has lots of different layers to it. So, the fact that there is a joyful observer there, their very presence in the behavior change literature would be called a nudge, because you recognize that somebody is watching. And again, as you say, you then want to perform in the right sort of way. You want to follow the right behaviors and so on. So it's a simple thing, but it works really well. DBS had another fun one that people like many organizations, it had too many restrictive policies. So it created a committee called the Kiasu Committee. Kiasu is Singaporean slang that roughly means fear of missing out, where you can go and sue a process. You can go and say, this process is stupid. It makes no sense. It was probably implemented at a time where it did make sense, but it's past its sell by date. Let's get rid of it. And the Kiasu Committee is empowered to get rid of that process. As an example, there used to be a requirement to get a physical signature on a vacation request. And, in 20 whatever, that just doesn't make sense. So they sued the process, they got rid of the policy, and everyone's like, huh, my life is just a little bit better. So again, those kinds of things, they really do work if they're done in earnest and done systematically. And DBS is a great example of how you can change by doing reasonably small things, but doing them really, really well.
And I think that's such a great point about it being done in earnest and being reasonable, is that the workers down the chain on the factory floor on the ground recognize that as the leaders wanting to make their lives a little bit easier.
Absolutely agree. And when you then also have the leaders kind of walking the talk, there's a famous story in DBS, Back to Meeting Mojo, where the story goes at the end of a meeting that a very senior leader was running. The very senior leader asked the Joe, how did I do? And, Singapore, very hierarchical, very patriarchal society. The Joe goes and kind of metaphorically crosses themselves and says, by the grace of God, you did a really poor job. You lost your temper, and once you did, everybody shut up. That story spreads like wildfire. The leader said, thank you for the feedback. I will do better next time, and did, in fact, do better next time. So when you have leaders who are actively participating and leaders who are demonstrating the behavior change themselves, that means the world inside organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. This might be a dumb question. Is that where the indoor waterfall is in the airport? Is that Singapore?
Singapore, that's Changi, is not a dumb question at all. Changi Airport is, in fact, the airport that has the indoor waterfall. I've spent many, 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 many hours at that airport, and it is not a bad place to spend many, many, many hours, which is a rare thing to say for an airport.
I've seen many pictures and many videos, and I would love to see it myself someday. So I like to get to a lightning round, right? So these are questions I did not prep you on. Just want your genuine reaction. I might know the answer to the first one, but I want to presume. Who is your most influential mentor?
It would have to be Clayton Christensen, who was my teacher and many other things from the Harvard Business School.
Can you talk about Clay a little bit?
Yeah, so I met Clay. It was almost 25 years to the date that we are recording this, at least. So I was in my second year at the MBA program at Harvard. I was taking the first version of a class that was ultimately called Building and Sustaining a Successful Enterprise. Clay was teaching it. There was no review of the class because it hadn't been taught before. He had written this book, The Innovator's Dilemma, so I at least had heard the name, but a bunch of HBS professors had written books. But I remember really distinctly the first day of class. He kind of ambled into class, is 6'8", so very tall guy. We're having this class that's all about disruptive change. And he does something incredibly anachronistic, which is he takes out acetates, like actual slides,
Yep.
and puts them on a projector and starts lecturing, which you just don't do at the Harvard Business School. It's all case-based education and so on. And there's some people in class who are like, what is going on? But I was hooked from just second one. Is in Clay's work, I saw a set of ideas that when I looked at them, I understood my own history in a different way. I understood my family's history in a different way. I understood the consulting work I had done before in a different way. I understood all the classes I had taken at school in a different way. I had new lenses. I could look at the world in a new way. And I said, not day one, but after a couple months, I want to learn more. So I spent 2 years doing research with him. We co-wrote a book together called Seeing What's Next. I joined the consulting company that he co-founded with my former colleague, Mark Johnson, spent 20 years there, ran the company for a few years and so on, but really spent 20 years very closely collaborating with Clay, an intellectual giant who also happened to be one of the best human beings that has ever walked this earth. And the world is much sadder for having lost him 5 years ago.
It's such a special thing to have that mentor, to have somebody who can really change your perspective, that gets into so many parts of your life that improves it. It's very cool. And everybody, we represent a number of Clay's colleagues and students, and it's just so special that almost to the person, everybody has that same analysis of the influence he had.
The only problem with it is I have this voice in my head all the time. When I do something that is not being my best self, when I make not the best decision, either in life, in business, or whatever, there's Clay's voice. And the thing about it, he's never judgmental. He never says you did a bad thing. It's always a question. Why did you take an action that you knew would lead to? And it then leads to you reflecting. So it's obviously a positive, not negative thing. But I think many people carry that voice along with them.
Yeah, that's very cool. Okay, so next, when you travel, what is your favorite food that you cannot get at home?
Favorite food I can't, well, I'll go back to Singapore. I mean, you can get it, but it's just not the same. No, actually, you cannot get it. In Singapore, one of the unique dishes in Singapore is a Sri Lankan crab. It's about this big. There's two varieties that are most popular. There is the pepper crab and the curry crab. I am a fan of the pepper crab, particularly the black pepper crab. There's also white pepper crab. So that you have to go to a pretty unique place to get the pepper crab, but that is the dish that I would fly 7,000 miles to go and get.
My whole family's from Wisconsin. For me, it's cheese curds. So don't have to go quite as far as Singapore. Okay, and finally, everyday fan or not, what is one sport you will stop to watch on TV when it's on?
Baseball for sure. So I grew up as a huge baseball fan. That was one thing I really missed living overseas. There was no baseball in Singapore. And one of the great joys of moving back to the Boston area is being 4 miles away from Fenway Park. And one of the great blessings has been watching my soon to be 9-year-old turn into a massive Red Sox fan.
Okay, is that your team going back to your childhood?
Well, my childhood team, I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. So I grew up as a Baltimore Orioles fan. My dad was originally from the Boston area. So he always was split loyalty. So the Red Sox were always kind of like a second team for us. And I first moved to the Boston area in 1999. And I lived here when the curse was broken in 2004. I saw the last game of the World Series when the Red Sox won 2013. I was in the stadium for that game.
Cool.
I was back from a trip from Singapore, and last minute said, just close your eyes at the prices and just buy one ticket, because, you'll forget the price, but you'll remember the memories. I remember the price too, but the memories far outweighed the price of it. So, a little bit of a converted Red Sox fan. When the Orioles were doing really well a couple of years ago, I was again torn, but yeah, the Red Sox would be the number one team.
I was having grown up in the 80s and 90s, one of the greatest interviews of my life. It was only probably within the last 10 years I got to interview Cal Ripken, which was just one of those moments where, I feel like this is it. I can get out of this business now. I've interviewed a true legend.
If we were in a different room doing this, I would show you the picture that I have from game 21-31. So
Nice.
We had season tickets to the Orioles. So I was at the game where he tied and broke the record, and we happened to be seated right in front of the box where his family was. So that was quite a night.
Very cool. So people who want to work with you, whether it's a keynote, whether it's consulting, they can go to sternstrategy.com. We've got articles, we've got links to your books, we've got videos of you presenting, excellent videos on there as well. Where else can people find you?
So I spend most of my time, in fact, almost all my time in social media in LinkedIn. So, just look for Scott Anthony. And if there are too many Scott Anthonys, you don't want the hypnotist or the one who wrote the book Profit from the Pie, which is about building your pizza business. Add the word Tuck into it because I teach at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, hence the green shirt today.
I know.
And epicdisruptions.com is the companion website for the book.
And the right pizza pie could be an epic disruption someday.
It could be. Well, I certainly could think about if you play with it. One of the things that's happening in the pizza space is you now have drone-based robotic delivery where pizzas are cooked but we probably have covered enough to not go into yet another story.
It all
it's
comes
coming
back
though.
to disruption. Yeah, no, I love it. So like you said, the book is Epic Disruptions, 11 Innovations That Shaped Our Modern World. Scott, I can't tell you how much I really appreciate your time today. Such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. It's been fun.